What episode is this?
Episode 24, baby.
I love how you keep track of them. I honestly had no clue.
You don't even care.
I don't. I'm just like,
My brain works differently than yours. When I tune into a podcast,
yeah,
I want to know what episode it is so that I can follow along. I want to know old from new.
that's so funny.
When we first started recording all of these, you were like, who cares about the episode? I do.
Interesting. Yeah, I love to hear from you guys. Do you care what number it is?
I think some people will. Some people won't.
Won't give a shit.
Yeah.
Ooh, so I'm honestly like vibrating in anticipation of this topic. And I don't even fully know why, other than it's like a pretty big topic. Today, we're going to be talking about grief and loss.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why we're talking about this today is because in my counseling school, we just covered this. I just had 3 weeks of grief counseling. And this was probably one of the most challenging classes for me thus far. And I think it's because it was an area of my own personal life that I was really avoiding and really had a lot of unresolved thoughts and feelings around.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you're going to cry?
Probably. I can kind of feel it at the surface.
I can already see it.
I mean,
That's good.
I don't know if you recall, but like any past conversations you and I have had around death.
Yeah.
I also want to quickly interject and say this conversation isn't just about death and the grief from the loss of death.
Of course.
But we're also going to be talking about the grief that comes from non-death losses.
Absolutely.
We can have a lot of grief from, our parents divorcing growing up and the loss of family and identity, loss of careers,
Loss of health and the identity around that can even come from the loss of living in a place or a home that you cherish so deeply but no longer have.
Moving is
It's such a big topic.
It really is. There's so many different areas. So we're going to kind of delve into all of that today and kind of have this conversation around not only how to provide you with some tools and how to navigate grief if you're going through it personally, but also if you know someone who is grieving, because
and how to show up for them better.
Yeah, because I don't know about you. Before I did this grief counseling class, death was always for me such an uncomfortable topic because I had my own unresolved feelings and thoughts around it.
Right.
And so anyone that I knew who was going through grief, specifically death-related grief,
yeah,
I just didn't know how to show up for that person.
I think that's very, very normal.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
how often do you know somebody whose, parent just died and you're like, I don't know what to say. So then we end up just maybe kind of avoiding that person a little bit,
Totally.
which is the worst thing in that situation. So often people who are going through grief end up isolating, either because they feel like they have to be alone, they can't share that pain and grief with others, or because like how often, do you hear of people who just like say the wrong things?
Totally.
So we're going to go into all of that today.
Good. I think that's good. Really good.
Yeah. But going back to what I was saying was like, remember in the past when you and I would have conversations around like mom and dad dying.
Yeah.
And like how that would always make me really, and obviously still really emotional. When Braun and I were, how long ago we lost our cousin, Dylan?
Yeah.
How long ago did he die?
16 years ago.
16 years ago.
16 years ago. Coming up. Yeah.
So our cousin Dylan, he passed away suddenly. It was an accidental death. And for me, ever since that happened, I literally think it's been probably almost every day of my life that now I think of my loved ones, especially mom and dad dying.
Okay.
Which they refer to as anticipatory grief.
Gotcha. That's what you learned in school. Anticipatory grief.
Yeah. When you're like anticipating the grief that is going to come from a loss. Like I also had that when I got my dog, Penny.
Yeah.
I have a girlfriend too. She's like, I have this with my dog as well. It's like you love them so much that you're already anticipating their death and already like ahead of time, fearful and grieving when that is inevitably going to happen.
I can feel that for sure.
Ooh. So yeah, this has been a really heavy topic for me. And I think it's been an area I've really tried to avoid talking about and confronting. Like our father, he has, and one of the things we actually talked about in this grief counseling class was having what's called a ready to go binder.
Okay.
And so basically preparing for your own death.
Oh.
So that when you die, not only having a better relationship with your own mortality and your own death,
yeah,
planning your own funeral,
Right.
having everything, like literally everything from choosing your own playlist, picking out your casket, how you want your body, like do you want to be buried, do you want to be cremated, all of these financial things and affairs, literally having all of that organized and in a binder and in a chart. Do you know that Dad has that?
Yep.
And like he's been trying to talk to us about it for a while, right?
I've never heard him try to talk to us about it.
He's brought it up to me a few times and I've just been like, I don't want to, because that conversation to me just felt like it was going to be way too painful to have, like really confronting that.
Right. Yeah, I've talked to him about a lot of those details for sure.
And it's so beautiful. Like I was saying in class, we had a really cool teacher. He's a grief counselor and a shaman. So he's got like this like deep spiritual side as well, which was really cool to have a teacher like that and learn from him. He had a really cool relationship with the afterlife and death. But I was saying to him, like, what a fucking beautiful thing. Like, I'm so grateful. A lot of our fathers, ours anyways, put a lot of work and effort into being that provider and taking care of our family. And now even he's forethinking of like, after death, like organizing his death and after death so that he can continue to take care of us and reduce some of that burden
for sure,
even when he dies and thereafter.
Yeah.
That is like, to me, such a picture of a beautiful
man,
embodiment of a beautiful man. Like
100%.
Wow.
Completely agree.
I think one of the biggest things with grief is how often we try to resist it. We don't want to feel it. We don't want to confront it. We don't want to accept it or look at it because it is so painful. And I think for anybody out there grieving, that is one of the big components of moving through grief is sitting in your pain and being with it and feeling it.
Right.
And if we don't, and if we do try to push and avoid and suppress, how that literally can lead to physical illness,
Absolutely.
Digestive issues and high blood pressure, like all these different components that then can start to show up in our physical body.
For sure.
Yeah.
And how's it been sitting with that?
The fact that I'm able to sit and talk about it right now without being as emotional as I would have in the past, I feel like goes to show that there has been some like growth and healing and movement in that.
For sure.
But yeah, like I said, I can feel like my heart rate is really high right now. And it's just like the topic is still, and maybe I think we should do an episode on this in the future, because I know this is a topic that you are really familiar with, is like your relationship to death.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the cool things that like I wanted to learn more about, and I think can help us really have a healthier acceptance around our death and the death of others.
Well, I think that, if I may interject quickly, I think that ought to be perhaps a big part of the conversation today, because I mean, so much of the reason why we struggle with the idea of loss is because of our relationship with death, the idea of death, the things that we've either been taught to think or assume about death, because the truth is none of us really deeply 100% know what happens. But I think the more healthy our perception of death, the healthier we'll be able to navigate it when it happens.
How do you personally have a healthier, like for me, there's the part of me that is such the skeptic. I have my spiritual side where I want to believe in life after death and all these pieces.
Fundamentally, you got to question your own beliefs and assumptions around death. And I think it's kind of a tricky thing to navigate, because on one hand, we have to simultaneously accept that no one can know the truth of what happens, while at the same time realizing that if you aim to challenge yourself to have a healthier relationship with the quote unquote end of the physical experience. And by healthy, I mean having a sense of belief that when we exit out of this physical body, there is still some kind of existence on the quote unquote other side. And I think that it's an interesting thing to hold both simultaneously. One, we really don't know, but at the same time, we can have faith that there is. And it's that faith that can bring us peace. It's that faith that can bring us even acceptance and love, and even, well, I think the word acceptance really embraces it all. Because like when I think of my loved ones dying, if I'm being honest, like my relationship with the idea of death, I think is extremely healthy, in that I believe that when we exit out of the physical, we reemerge with our higher selves. You know, I personally wouldn't call it heaven. I don't subscribe to like firm Christian beliefs, but it is a place, I like to refer to it as the non-physical, where we still very much have a unique sense of personality, a unique consciousness, which we can experience the universe, reality, but it's non-physical. So I actually don't really believe in death in the way that a lot of people think of it, because I believe that we continue to exist after we exit out of the physical body.
Right.
So with that belief, I simultaneously accept that that actually might not be true. But because of my faith in that, while alive here in the physical, I can have a healthy relationship with the idea of my loved ones dying. Sure, it's on a physical level for me. There's going to be that period of grief where
You better cry really hard when I die.
Yeah.
I want big tears.
It's
massive.
That will be, on one hand, like, I'll just be real. On one hand, that will be like one of the most devastating experiences I'll ever go through. And on some level, and I mean this, it will be a happy one too, because I do believe that when we die, we go quote unquote home. It's kind of hard to use our language to describe, the after death experience, but I believe we do go home. I believe that there is only beauty and only love meeting us on the other side. And there's a lot of different reasons why I have that belief, from all of the studies into past life regression work, and anybody who's had a near-death experience, they're all the same. Everybody that has any kind of experience where they've actually touched the other side, they all say the same thing: light and love. I believe that.
Can I ask, do you choose to believe this, or do you feel like you've had personal experiences that have led you to believe this? Well, I know you just spoke to all these experiences of people dying.
Yeah.
That, to me, I'm my brain sometimes works from this evidence.
For sure.
Where's the evidence?
I think, and I'm glad you're saying that, because I think that's important. You know me, healthy skepticism is an MO of mine. So to answer your question, it is both. I think the fundamental experience that I've had is in my own personal healing work, my own personal healing journey with my past life regression work, and how that trauma has very much shown up in this lifetime.
Yeah, if you guys haven't listened to that episode, Braun talked about his past life experience. Check out that episode.
Yeah, it's a great episode. And so that experience itself, and the emotional upheaval that came around all of that, the healing, the fucking work I've had to do to process that's been massive. So that has definitely, on a personal level, has led me to believe that there is absolutely, without a doubt, something beyond, outside of this physical experience. I may not know exactly what, but between that experience, as well as all of the studying and reading that I've done through spiritual texts and everything that I just referred to, has led me to believe that there's nothing but love and light on the other side.
See, I'd love to have more of that faith and belief. And that's why in class I was very curious with my teacher and hearing his experience. And, he attributed it to a few things, one of which was living, he experienced some really low lows of life.
Yes.
And after hitting those really low lows, I think after that there was just more of a greater appreciation for this life, and to live all out and full out and living in fully in alignment. And that part I can relate to. I feel peace if I were to die, in that I feel I have lived a life that has felt very aligned and purposeful and meaningful, and a lot of the cool shit that I've wanted to do and experience, I've done it.
Right.
So it's no regrets.
Right.
Live the life for you that feels enriched, and that you're not going to have any regrets.
Right.
And then the other thing he was talking about was plant medicine, ayahuasca ceremonies, and actually giving you an experience of other realms beyond this physical one.
Right.
And I think, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah. I haven't delved in so deep into I've done ayahuasca, and I've had a lot of psilocybin experiences where I've had those kind of cosmic experiences where I've connected to reality in a way that's not trapped inside the Braun Johnson, inside my, day-to-day perspective of reality. And so that's played in a little bit. It's more so what I already expressed though. And I do want to answer the question that you asked, which was, do I choose to believe that? And the answer is absolutely yes. And what it comes down to is like, you can either choose to have that kind of what I would really call a healthy relationship with the idea of death, or the alternative is to be in fear about it.
It brings to my mind, I don't know if you recall this at all, but like our grandmothers passed away 3 days apart from one another.
Yes.
They were in hospice together at the same time. They were very close. They were like best friends, and they passed within 3 days of one another.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this, but like one of our grandmothers was very fearful of dying, and the other one had total peace. She had more of a relationship with God, and she believed that she was, going to heaven. And I remember, when I saw her, like for the first time when she was sick, and she just looked so different.
Yeah.
And I remember like she saw the look on my face because I hadn't seen her in so long, and she just looked like, whoa, like evidently not well.
Right.
And I remember her just like looking at me and being like, it's okay, dear. Like I'm good.
Yeah.
And she was genuinely so at peace with dying. And I was like, wow, say what you want about religion, whether you believe in it or not, but like just seeing the way that she was able to have this happier, uplifted, peaceful experience with and her life coming to an end. I was like, give me some of that.
Yeah. Anybody can have it. I think it starts with accepting the fact that no one can really know. No one does. It's impossible to fully conceptualize the totality of reality from our human experience. Our brains literally can't process it.
Yeah.
So faith, which is trust without data, we have to have faith in order to have that healthy connection with it.
Right.
And also have an interest in and genuine curiosity in it too. Like for me, since I was 18 years old, about 18 years now, I've been so passionate about that question. What is God? Like, who are we really? What is happening on the other side, if there is one? And that genuine curiosity really has led me to this paradigm where when I think about death, it feels lovely. It feels positive. That word death, it sounds like such an abrupt ending. And for me, it's not that at all. It's just a transformation from one form into another.
Yeah. We were talking in class about even the image of like the Undertaker,
right?
That like cartoon image of the Undertaker with like the black cloak and the hood and the big knife, the scythe or whatever he's holding. And it's like this,
you can call it a knife, sure.
Well, whatever. I don't know what it is. Whatever. Some sort of sharp object that probably kills.
Is it Seth or Scythe?
I
think it's
literally have no clue.
Brain go.
But like how even that is like this dark, scary image. And so it just goes to show, like, I think that was part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation today, is because like death is inevitable for all of us. And the way that it's depicted a lot of the times in our culture is really kind of like scary and something we don't want to talk about.
Totally. And I mean, I would even take that point a step further and like, look at how much our society values looking and being youthful.
Oh yeah.
Right? As opposed to honoring the, even getting called old has such a negative connotation to it. As opposed to honoring and even respecting the elderly, and embracing that. I mean, look how we treat our older generations.
It's so true. We grew up, our mom worked taking care of, the elderly. And I remember going and volunteering, working with her when we were younger. And you're right. I think that is a big part of it. We have such a fear and resistance to death and getting older. It's like the way that we just kind of put our older population to the side, don't want to look at it, don't want to deal with it. And these other cultures who not only continue to like really connect with the elderly, but it's like they're the wisdom, the honoring of that lifespan. And we really don't do that in our culture.
For sure.
It's really sad. Good conversation, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Mm-mm.
Well, with that, then, if you're okay with that, I think maybe we can move into talking a little bit about grief. And if you know somebody who is currently experiencing grief, how to be with that.
Totally.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we were kind of talking about is so often when people are in grief, they feel like they need to go through it alone. I don't know about you, but, for example, anytime I've gone through like a really big breakup in life
Right.
where, you're like, your heart is breaking and you're in so much pain,
Mhm.
that feeling of needing to isolate
Mhm.
because you don't want to burden anyone with your grief.
Well, it's not only the fear of burdening, but it is actually, I think, largely this certain awareness that if we were to express it, like you said earlier, it's likely that the person that we express it to won't know how to hold it,
Yeah.
won't know how to honor it, won't know how to respond to it in a way that actually is healthy and healing and supports us.
Yes. So this is why we're having this conversation, because we want to teach you how to be better with holding grief for your loved ones.
Yeah. And holding that for yourself as well.
And I think it is a good thing to be mindful of that. Yeah, not everybody is going to be great in those situations. And this is where, having a counselor, for me, that has always been my support system in life.
For sure.
And the place that I have felt safe to express a lot of my grief. Ideally, it's nice to have that, with like lots of friends and family. And I've done a little bit of that as well, but I definitely was guilty of feeling like I didn't want to burden people.
Yeah, for sure.
And feeling like, we always need to show up with the happy, smiling face.
For sure.
So, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that we were discussing in class when it comes to, your loved ones experiencing grief is how often we try to fix the situation.
Yeah.
We lead with our head.
Yeah.
And we think that we need to fix. So it's
Yeah.
like if your best friend is going through a breakup, you say like, oh, he was a jerk anyways, or you're going to find someone much better.
For sure.
And it's like oftentimes these sentiments, oh, things happen for a reason. They don't always really feel good when people say those things to us.
Right.
And we're coming from a well-intentioned place, but like we're because we can't be with that person's pain,
Yeah.
we feel this need to fix it.
Correct.
So we were talking about, instead of leading with your head, leading with your heart.
Yeah. And body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how often that person really just needs someone to be there with them, even in silence sometimes.
Totally.
Literally, if it's just like sitting on the couch watching TV, like maybe that's what it is.
I've had experiences with even close friends who are experiencing grief, and I've found that the most beautiful and healthy response is to just be there in presence, being there with them and breathing with them. And I think a part of that can, if there is any verbal adage to that, it's what does support look like for me right now?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I also love, asking them if there was anything that wants to be shared.
Yeah.
There might be a period where someone wants to just sit in silence and doesn't want to talk, but sometimes as the grief moves through, and grief comes in stages,
Oh boy, does it ever.
It's not linear. There are the 5 different stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And those different emotions can come at different times. You might be feeling just depressed for a while, and then out of the blue, you're angry.
Yep.
So you're going to feel different things at different times. And the way that you experience your grief is different than how I'm going to experience my grief.
And I think that's another reason why it's such a complex topic, is the ways and the levels and the different times we experience it. It's all over the map. Like you said, it's not linear.
Yeah, totally. And you can think you're good for a while, and then maybe the anniversary comes up and it hits you again.
Or just like out of the blue,
Yeah.
it just pops up and hits you.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is, having that support system and that community. Grief needs a witness.
Yeah.
That's been one of the biggest things for me. And my personal realization from this class was like how often I was just alone in my own grief,
Right.
because I didn't want to burden others, and I didn't feel like people could carry my emotions or sit with my emotions, because I have always been such a deeply feeling person.
Right.
But how important that really is for the healing process.
For sure.
And the opposite of depression is expression.
Right.
Is expressing. And so how often we do push down our feelings, our emotions, and we become depressed because we're just pushing all this stuff down.
Yeah.
So it is so important to express it, whatever that looks like for you. There are different ways of expressing our grief. Some people do express verbally, and that's how they process,
Right.
but it can also be done in other ways, like through art or song lyrics.
For sure.
For some people, it's more physical, like dance or just being out in nature. But one of the biggest things we talked about was like being intentional when you are doing those things, like if you're going out in nature or say you're, doing some art, oftentimes we might do these things as a way of escaping.
Right.
So instead of escaping, just being mindful of connecting with that loss
For sure.
and that pain and channeling it through that expression.
Yeah.
As opposed to pushing it down and avoiding it.
Yeah, for sure. I think on the other side of the scale, we can drown in our grief.
Yes.
Right. Like I love that what you just said, the opposite of depression is expression. And I think that as opposed to suppressing our emotions, it's extremely healthy to express them. But if we go too far with that, we can just drown ourselves in the grief. There has to be a middle ground where we're honoring the grief when it comes up, set and met with the intention of moving through it and moving beyond it when we're ready. And we can really only know that pace for us.
Totally. I'm so glad you brought that up, Ron.
Yeah.
We refer to that as dual processing.
There it is.
And that's exactly what it is it's like honoring that, sometimes we don't want to tap into that grief because we're afraid that if we do, the dam's going to break and it's just going to be too much to be with.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you feel like you can do this with yourself or a friend, go for it. But it is also really nice to work with a skilled counselor to really help build that safety and know what feels safe for you.
Yeah.
And literally, maybe that's only in your counseling session, sitting with the pain for 60 seconds.
For sure.
And then when you leave that counseling session, you can go back to, being busy and working hard. And because a lot of the times we do, after a big grief or a loss, develop these tendencies where we do become workaholics or, addictions or different things as a way of coping and avoiding.
For sure.
So it's like, finding that, as you just said, that healthy balance of pendulating between the pain and then still doing life. And
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
I think another thing that is really helpful around this topic is not making the griever do the work. So for example, in the past, when someone I knew who was going through loss or grief, because I was so uncomfortable with the topic, I would be like, just like, let me know if you need anything. And oftentimes people who are in deep grief, they are in such depression, sadness, they can't really even advocate for themselves in that way.
Right.
So we talked about just like the kindness of maybe it's just like showing up and, leaving dinner on the doorstep.
For sure.
Offering to take their kids and babysit for a night or something so they can have an evening of self-care.
Yeah.
It's doing those things where like we kind of think ahead of time or on behalf of them what would be helpful and supportive instead of waiting for them to tell us what they need.
Right. I think such a big part of that too is consistently checking in.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we're actually in care for the people in our lives, especially if we know someone going through grief, if we really do care, we do get impulses to check in on them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people ignore those impulses. And I think it's so important that we listen to those and follow up and just send people messages. Hey, was thinking about you. I love you. How you doing?
Yeah, I was saying in class, I kind of struggled with that one a little bit because like I said, oftentimes for me, and I think we often do this, we project that other people are going to deal with the situation the same way that we would.
For sure.
So for me in the past, when I've gone through grief, I just isolate because I didn't want anybody to like see me in that state.
Yeah.
So I project that other people also just want to be left alone. Mm-hmm. The reality is if somebody were to just like step through that and be like, hey, I got you. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know about you.
Yeah.
But if someone were to have done that for me in the past in my grief, had to just shown up anyways and been like, hey, you don't need to open the door, but I left you dinner on your doorstep. Like, oh.
Yeah. Massive.
Just to feel that care from another human being, like that's huge.
Yeah.
And I think unfortunately a lot of us maybe haven't experienced that because this topic has felt so taboo and awkward and uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think we covered a lot of this when it comes to sitting with other people in their grief. It's very similar for us if we are going through our own grief. The biggest things being that we need to feel it, we need to move through it and express it for us to have any kind of processing or resolve around that.
For sure.
You were actually going to read that. You found something really lovely online talking about grief.
Yeah, I was looking up online and was curious about the actual definition, and I found something really lovely, and I think it really hits home. It's a little bit long, but it's helpful, I think, here. It says, grief is the emotional, mental, and even physical response to loss. It's not just about mourning someone who has passed away. It's the process of adjusting to any significant change where something or someone we deeply valued is no longer a part of our lives. At its core, grief is love with nowhere to go. I loved that line.
Mm-hmm.
It's the gap between what we hoped for or had and the reality we now face. It's a natural human response to loss, and it can show up in many ways: sadness, anger, numbness, confusion, even relief sometimes. Grief isn't something to get over, quote unquote. It's something we learn to carry and integrate into our lives. It reshapes us, but it doesn't have to define us.
Mm.
And I think that's so important. And it's so hard to realize when we are in grief. Like, it's so hard to imagine life outside of our grief because it's like a dark hole of emotion. I mean, the truth is that grief can actually and will be a gateway to positive transformation in the end. And of course, it's hard to see that while we're going through it. But as we are experiencing and processing and healing from our grief, the healing is actually integrating what life is like and who we now are on the other side of it.
Yeah, that was one of the things our teacher kept saying, like, let grief be the ultimate teacher.
Yeah.
It's like, on the one hand, it's kind of sad that I think about mom and dad dying every day. But at the same time, it's actually a positive thing because it makes me really, really appreciate the time that I have with them,
Right.
and make the most of it. And the times that they're driving me crazy, I'm like, okay, you're going to be gone one day and then I'm really going to miss you. So I'm just going to be here and be present with this, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do love that line. What was it? Grief is love with nowhere to go.
Yeah. It's the body's response to loss and figuring out what life means now, what it means to be us sometimes even.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is life without that person, that thing, that experience, that identity, that place that we had so much attachment to and no longer are connected to.
Totally. And that was kind of one of the other pieces that I actually did want to touch on. It's like you just keep like naturally going where I was thinking of going. I
Just
love
feeding
it.
you the gold, girl.
Thanks, brah. Thank ya. Was that like change in meaning, that difference in what the relationship is? You know, it's like, as you spoke to earlier, it's like their physical body may be gone, but we can still have a relationship with that person.
Yeah.
And how can we still connect with them, whether that's talking to them every night before you go to bed, or creating a special little altar in your home somewhere where you have their photos and you light a candle and send them well wishes,
Right.
finding a way to honor them.
I think like when we talk about grief that comes from like loss of a relationship, like a romantic relationship, like after a breakup, I think something that's helped me a lot get through the grief is staying focused in the awareness of what I really want moving forward. Because when it comes to like romantic relationships, I think there's a really powerful truth to be aware of, which is it was never the person that gave you the love that you think that they gave you. We don't really realize this, but that feeling of love we get, we just use our lover as an excuse to feel love. The love that we feel is ultimately interdependent.
Mm-hmm.
We think it's coming from them. And of course, it feels so good when they do love us.
Mm-hmm.
But the love that we actually feel is coming from within us.
Yeah.
Right. And so if that lover leaves moving forward, we have to be aware that, first of all, that love, first and foremost, has to come from ourselves within. And also, when we do accomplish that, like build the skill of deep fundamental self-love, then we ask ourselves, what kind of relationship do I now want?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what did that past relationship that I lost teach me? What did I learn from that? And what is it going to tell me about how I think about my next relationship when I'm ready?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you may not be if you're still going through grief, but when I am ready, what is it that I really want to attract? And I think the beauty of life, the truth is that there's always something even greater, even deeper, even more meaningful, even more beautiful waiting for us in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're stuck in our grief, it's really hard to remember that.
Yeah.
And what's helped me is remembering that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pulled me to that more healed state where I'm no longer feeling as much grief anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, grief pops up from time to time, but it's very, very helpful to stay in that mindset of, okay, what did I learn from that? And how am I going to use all of that learned experience to imagine the beauty and joy in my next relationship and what that looks like to me?
Yeah, it was interesting as you were talking about that. I was in my head thinking that's a little bit harder with death related grief. But then as you were speaking, it actually extends to what we were talking about like, when someone passes away, there is a part of the grieving process where it can be really healing to make meaning of that person's life.
Right.
What did you learn from them?
Yes.
What did you learn from their life?
Yes.
And is there a way where we talked in class about, creating ceremony and rituals
Yes.
around our grief?
Yes.
So whether that is a relationship or the passing of a loved one, it's like, how can you honor them?
Yes.
Is there a way where you can find a way of carrying their memory or their legacy on forward? Maybe it was something about their personality that you're like, you know what, because they were this way, I am now going to show up more of that way in my life.
Exactly.
Like my teacher was talking about on his brother's deathbed.
Yeah.
His biggest regret was that he said he didn't live life full out. Like there was always like 12% where he held back.
Right.
So my teacher is saying his like new mentality and mantra moving forward was always live life full out, 100% just in case.
For sure.
So yeah, can we take some like teachings or learnings from our loved ones who passed away and apply them to our life so that like their life was really worth that?
For sure. Yeah,
You know?
I hear you. And it makes me think of that transformation from turning grief, evolving into gratitude.
Yeah.
You feel that grief, the pain of loss, but when you do move through the healing journey of it, you grow to have gratitude where there was once grief.
Yeah. So as we talked about before, like grief is not a linear process. It takes time. You're going to go through stages of feeling maybe numb, disconnected, being with those intense emotions and grief. And at some point there can be that wanting to honor, that making meaning of that person's life. And as we talked about, like doing some sort of ceremony. One of the girls in my class shared this really lovely idea of a ceremony. Might I share?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought that this was really lovely. After the passing of a loved one, she was talking about, going out into the forest. So being out in nature, being really intentional of like connecting to your loved one while you're there and collecting, some flowers and herbs and bark and just like pieces of nature and creating like this little bundle. Maybe you include some sort of memorabilia. But what she did was like she made these little bundles, these little love bundles that were dedicated to her loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then what she did actually was she burned them
Mm-hmm.
as a sign of, like completion of this physical form.
Mm-hmm.
And as the smoke was rising into the sky, sending words of love, intention, whatever it may be, just like speaking to your loved one and visualizing that kind of like going up as that smoke goes up into the sky, like visualizing that connecting with them and that message being sent to them.
For sure. That's gorgeous.
And there's so many ways, like as Braun, when we started this conversation, he was like, this is a really big topic. Like there's so many aspects of this. We also talked about, women who go through miscarriage or people who are not able to be there for the death of their loved ones, like during COVID and actually maybe doing, and like for me, I was like, oh my God, this is intense. But once again, it's like sometimes we avoid being with the topic because it's too hard and heavy, but we talked about the healing of actually maybe like recreating a funeral.
Right.
Like if you, had the death of a child, actually like creating like a little funeral.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all symbols in honoring what was and what is now transformed into something else and bringing peace, grace, love, and acceptance around that. Yeah, so important. I think we aim to do that during the funeral process, and I think it's not always accomplished in the way that I think is really meaningful. I mean, I've been to some funerals where I don't feel like that there was as deep of an honoring of the person's life. But again, that just points to what I feel like the reason is why we are having this conversation. I think we're still learning how to have healthier, better relationship with death and how to honor it and how to move through our grief around that.
But I love the idea of someone creating their own funeral, because I was thinking about this, like if someone I loved passed away, it would be like, yeah, what would they want? But if you have this conversation and you know exactly what they want it to look like, then how much easier is that to truly honor them and to show up feeling good that you're honoring them, knowing that was how they wanted to be honored.
Yeah, I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have those conversations.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
No, we don't.
It's healthy to...
I want like RuPaul, drag queen,
You don't have to tell me that, I already knew.
rhinestone
I was
extravaganza.
just thinking like unicorns and...
That too.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be sparkly AF.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? Any thought?
I don't.
No?
No, not right now. I don't plan on dying for a while. Yeah, I think the last thing to say is that if anybody listening to this is experiencing grief, I would encourage them to reach out to you or myself or anybody that they feel called to connect with, because everybody needs someone. Everybody needs a safe space to learn how to move through that at their own time. But it's so important to reach out and connect when you need the support.
Yeah. Find those people and places where you can feel truly held in your pain and in your grief, and don't go
Absolutely.
at it alone.
Yeah,
Grief needs a witness, baby.
that's right. Healthy conversation. Thanks for bringing it to the table.
Yeah, thank you, Ron.
And we will see you all next
week for what episode? 25?
25. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for joining us. And we hope that this was helpful and we hope it served you. And yeah, we're sending you all of our love.
Yeah. Hot Johnson love. Hot Johnson out.
Hot Johnson Nation. Peace.
Bye.